the 3 R's we just discussed, the 3 rules that we just discussed, will inspire you to rethink the importance of your human talent and encourage you to focus on the human side of quality. I wish you every success as you continue on your quest to champion quality in your company, and I look forward to hearing about your successes at future meetings like this one. Thank you.
We now start our last question and answer demonstrative session. We'd like to remind you to please pose your questions in a brief way in order to have more access. We still had a question with one of our computers, people in Paraguay. Wouldn't a standardization of policies and procedures create a dependency of the developing countries?
I think the standardization of policy and procedures is going to be greatly impacted depending on where your work environment, where you're located. Obviously, the Disney company has proven that in a negative way, unfortunately. Very successful in the United States, very successful in Japan, but when they opened Euro Disney in France, they, I think, violated so many of the traditions and procedures that were that were practiced by the French people, and it did not sit well with the French people. So yes, I think you have to look at the standards, the policies and procedures in a country and adapt. As the old expression goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do.
Just to comment on that same subject, as Deming and others have pointed out, variability is the enemy of quality. Really, when we try to document processes and so forth, we're trying to come up with the best way to do a particular task or process to eliminate human variability, which ultimately affects our customers. We see right now ISO 9000, standards for world trade. We're requesting that all companies who are involved in world trade actually have documented procedures. But when the designers of these processes, or the ISO, set it up, they did not want to affect countrywide autonomy. So really the enforcement of these really become part of each country's culture.
Question comes from Catepec, the state of Mexico. It's somebody from the Superior Technological Institute. With regards to a human aspect, how can you interpret and manage the different syndicates?
By syndicates, I assume that people are talking about
unions.
Unions. First of all, if we've learned anything in the United States with respect to the relationship between management and unions or syndicates, we have learned that it is a partnership. One of the great success stories in the 80s and 90s has been the willingness of unions and auto manufacturer management to work together as a team to achieve total quality. Without that partnership, it would not be possible. So unions have a very significant role to play, but they also need to understand that they're a partner in the process and not the enemy.
And really that is supported in the state of California. Every time we implement on a company's site the TQM process, the advice always is that we want a union representative on the steering committee. He has to really, like everybody else, be brought up to date with what we're trying to do, and we need his contributions as far as work rules and so forth are concerned.
Thank you. From Tepeca, we got a call from the administration school. Go ahead. ¿Cómo? No le oímos. ¿Me puede decir otra vez la?
¿Cuáles serían algunas de las principales estrategias?
What would it be the basic strategies? What would be the strategy to follow when you have a country with too many unions?
That's a difficult question.
That's a difficult question. But really what we're talking about here is company by company implementation of TQM. And really, why make a complex problem when we can break it down into components? How many unions are you interfacing in the company where you as a leader are trying to implement the TQM? It really becomes quite manageable.
The other aspect of that question, or the other dimension to that question, is this. Don't the unions want the same results that management wants? That is, more work for the employees, higher wages, and steady work jobs. The unions want the same things that management wants. It's a matter of bringing them together, talking, working out their differences. And I know that sounds simplistic, but frankly, it's a simple process. You have to sit down and talk to each other.
The next question comes from Guadalajara, the University of Guadalajara. Good afternoon. I'd like to ask you, what would you ask the high-level executives in the university in order to implement TQM when you have all types of clients and there are conflicting interests coming from all types of clients?
This program today comes from San Diego State University, which is probably a very good example of your question. In the United States, we have the same structure in our universities that I'm sure you have in your country. We have an administration, we have a faculty, we have a student population. All of these different interest groups have specific wants and needs. I'm going to refer to George's previous answer because I think he said it so well when he suggested you have to define the vision of the organization, what it is we stand for, and then look at those issues that you can bring people together on so that you can begin to achieve the beginning steps of quality. Don't overcomplicate the process. Everybody wants to be part of a successful organization.
You know, there's two factors involved here. One of them is internal to the university itself, and the other is for the student body themselves. Really, these days, nobody should graduate from a college that doesn't have some kind of training in TQM concepts. And number two, there should be internal overtures and efforts made by the heads of universities to install a program where they bring together the various colleges of a university, and by consensus and thinking, they decide how they're going to implement the TQM process at their spot.
We have another question from Guadalajara. This is a Federal Electric Commission. Go ahead. Is it a more favorable working environment when you inspect, even though there are some errors in the statistics?
Take a look at the various countries in the world. Take a look at Germany. Germany inspected. Inspecting just adds cost. It does not provide in prevention. Even from a business standpoint, when we are going through our business processes and we have to have 6 people sign a purchase order, in a way that's an inspection too. Really what we're trying to get away from is change the concept completely, that the operator is responsible for the quality of the work, that we don't need to develop an adversarial relationship with a third party to look over their shoulders and inspect something. It's fundamental to the total quality program that we develop that concept and get rid of inspection.
From Ecuador, we have a question from the bank. How would you implement total quality and re-engineering, and how would you prevent the impact, the social impact on the employees?
Maybe I could talk about that one a little bit. When we talk about productivity improvements, we're talking about getting more for less. Yes, it does have there could be an impact as far as employees are concerned. Many companies have answers to this but in different ways. For example, in some companies, they guarantee that nobody will lose their job as long due to a TQM process. That really the strategy that we're trying to unfold is we want more work, not less work. By being more competitive, then we can hire more employees, even though we're getting more for less. So many companies have developed a strategy, but you have to be upfront with people, and really during the training program, you deal with these kind of issues, so everybody feels comfortable in moving the company ahead.
I think also, Armando, that quality, you have to remember, begins with people. And as George suggests, if we are going to include people in the quality process, then many of those concerns, I think, will be resolved at the initial stages of your total quality process. There's no question that people are concerned about their jobs anytime you introduce change. So it's very important to involve people in the quality process from the beginning, and that way many of their fears will be taken care of or resolved.
The next question comes from via phone from Asunción in Paraguay, and it's somebody from the Catholic University. How do you maintain a TQM in a company which has a high turnover or change within management or even in employees within the interior?
I think McDonald's, the fast food restaurant here in the United States, is a good example of high turnover, and the answer, I think, is you have to have standards. If you have high quality standards, then it doesn't matter whether in the morning it's one employee flipping the hamburgers and preparing the meals, and in the afternoon another shift comes in. The standards will always be there. So I would say in response to your question that the key is to have high quality standards.
The point that I would make is that high turnover in a company is a perfect example of waste. And really, maybe the 6th or 7th week into a quality training program, that would surface. And the question we would ask is, instead of an opinion, why do we have such high turnover? What can we do to stabilize the employment in a company? And I think that good people, creatively thinking about these problems, you come up with answers very quickly.
The next question comes from the Technological University of Tulatipi. I have 5 questions, and I don't know if I can ask them all. Do you think that there is a possibility to change a culture, a TQM culture in Mexico? What are the steps and the obstacles in achieving it?
Yeah. Having given seminars down in Monterrey and Mexico City, and having worked in Guadalajara and so forth, I would say that there is no problem at all in Mexico. No more different problem than we have in the United States. I really find that people are well trained, very interested in making changes and so forth. In fact, I think Mexico is a delightful area for the TQM process.
I would also add that the challenge that you have in Mexico or Paraguay or even in the United States is the challenge with management. The problem is not the employees in most instances. I believe that inspired leadership can implement a total quality process and sell that down through the ranks of the organization. So I would agree with what George just said.
One comment that I would make is that really Deming's teachings and others, we are borrowing ideas from all over the world to shape the TQM process. And I think one thing that we've all learned is that really TQM is culturally independent.
La siguiente pregunta viene del Instituto
From the Technological Institute of Merida. Go ahead. I have a question for Mr. George Wolf. what are the basic steps of TQM which are necessary in order to apply them in a company? What's the first thing that needs to be done?
I think the first thing that has to be done in a perfect world would be to spend 1 or 2 days and assess the company. Go on down there and find out just exactly where the company is coming from. What are their concerns? What are their processes and so forth? And then to have a management overview course whereby everybody understands what they're getting into when we talk about total quality management. I think that if we could get the management people really turned on in a company, it will cut down the time it takes to change the culture very significantly. So those are the first 2 steps, a quick assessment and then the design of a course for your quality leaders. And these leaders are not only from a management standpoint, but they could well be people in the company that other people look up to.
I would like to add to that, Armando, that when you talk about assessments, it's important to assess your customers, your management, and your employees, and I would also include your key suppliers, because they all play a role in the success or failure of a total quality process.
Final question, which comes from the Polytechnic Institute of Mexico City. What is the meaning of re-engineering or mistake proving process?
Yes, that is in your workbook. And let me just expand that a little bit. As we get into total quality management, and maybe 6 or 7 weeks down the pike, what we start to do is we start to break up people into teams. And one of the first things we look at are processes in a company. When you stop to think of where we're spending our money, our equipment resources, our people resources, it's really the business processes of a company. Unfortunately, these business processes are very difficult to change. They cut horizontally across all functions.
Gracias, George, muy amable.
Okay.
On
behalf of the International Training Center, I thank you for both the interest and participation in this program. Any last comments about the program? Thank you for our audience in all of the countries, 55 cities. The International Training Center will transmit the second video conference of the Serious Management in the 20th Century on March 24, 1994. Organizational change. Until soon.
Ahora continuamos con nuestra transmisión para aquellas personas
We will
que
now continue the transmission, and we invite you that you continue asking our questions from our experts. I'd like to pass one other ask. Within a company in which the total quality management is handled, is it possible to both have 2QM and ISO 9000?
Well, absolutely. It is possible because it's happening in many, many companies. And I'll let George speak to the ISO 9000. But these are not incompatible processes. ISO 9000 is a standardization, whereas total quality management is trying to work through different processes that you have in your company and make them more customer-friendly, both internally and externally. I'll let George respond to the ISO 9000 and his thoughts on that.
Many companies that I am working with are doing both. They're putting in the TQM process and also ISO 9000. The concern that you have, and I think another one of our attendees mentioned that, is how do we get the strategies of a company in line? The problem that we could have is we could have too many people involved in too many different quality initiatives, and that really is a function of the steering committee.
Now we have another question that asks, in printed material we note here that management does not always promote change within TQM. What do you do if the management is not in agreement with these ideas?
Well, first of all, if management is not in agreement with the concept of total quality, it's not going to fly. It's doomed. So, as Winnie Schaefer and I wrote in our book, you have to have commitment from the top. If there's no commitment from the top, I don't see how you can have a successful implementation of total quality management.
We have to ask ourselves the question of why management is not committed to the process, and we have to deal with that. And really what we're asking is management to keep an open mind so they fully understand what's involved and what the cost benefits are going to be in today's global society.
Reiteramos nuestra invitación a quienes nos están escuchando.
We invite those of you that want to call the studio 619-265-1021 or by fax 619-594-8178. Same area code. The same question comes, how do we know that we have covered the client's expectations?
I think you need to ask your clients what their expectations are. I don't know of any company that has successfully implemented quality or any kind of process without first going to the customer and asking them, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And if you were running our company, what changes would you want to make in order to make our services or product better for you, the customer?
The next question is from someone in Tijuana, Baja California. What is the strategy in order to implement TQM where you have a company where you have Japanese and Mexican cultures, with different cultures?
You discuss, really what we're talking about. It really depends upon the size of the company. If you have a very large company, what you would like to do is develop a rollout plan. We have priorities and strategies we want to carry out. The steering committee agrees that this is the approach that we're going to take and implement from there. We try to tailor these TQM programs basically to the company's cultural background and also their desires for the future.
I would add to that, Armando, that anytime you're dealing with diversity in the workplace, and in this particular question you're talking about not only Japanese culture but a Mexican culture located in Tijuana, again, I think you have to allow both cultures to surface, but I would think, depending on who owns the company, but certainly the workforce has to be predominantly Mexican, I would think that their cultural habits and views would have to dominate.
Gracias, Matsushita. ¿Tienen
Thank you.
ustedes alguna otra
Matsushita,
pregunta?
do you have
que
any
quiera ser
other
respondida en
questions
este momento?
that you would like to be answered right this time?
Bueno, continuamos con nuestra sesión de preguntas y respuestas.
We continue our
Les
question and
invitamos
answer
a que
session.
nos
We
llamen por
invite
teléfono para
you
recibir
to
las
call
respuestas de
via
nuestros
phone
expertos. Hay
in
una
order
que
to get
dice,
the
"La
answer from
mejor
the
manera de
expert.
vender TQM a los gerentes
The best way to
cuando la producción y no
sell
la calidad
TQM to
son
the
las
management
posiciones del día".
is the total quality and production, and they are differing.
And the question?
If I understand the question, production people may have one set of objectives, and the total quality people may have something else. And the point is that we have to merge these goals that each one of these groups has together. And really what it takes, of course, is leadership. That really, if we are going to be a quality-driven company, then some of the performance objectives we've had in the past, for the past 30 or 40 years, are going to have to change to world-class objectives. And this is how we measure our employees. Are they team workers? What kind of measurements can we get for quality as opposed to the more simplistic production goals?
The other side of that question is that the leadership has to have a very clear vision so the employees, whether they're in production or marketing or whatever department they're in, they have a clear vision and direction for where the company is going and how it's going to get there. Without that, you're going to be tripping all over each other and you will have cross purposes. And that does not serve the interest of the company or the customer.
Bueno, vamos a abrir la línea nuevamente a alguien de
Okay, now we're going to open up
Adelante.
the line, somebody in Tijuana.
Bueno, yo tengo una pregunta.
Well, I have a
¿Cómo se
question.
puede mejorar la eliminación
How
de
can you-
barreras laborales
How can you
para que el
improve
empleado
the,
se sienta orgulloso
how
de
can
su
you,
trabajo?
how can you
De
make
acuerdo
the
a la
employee
filosofía del doctor
proud of his work?
What motivates employees? We've touched on that subject before. That really what people want in this life are rewards and recognition. And really, a lot of our companies, we have not done a very good job of recognizing superior behaviors. And really what we want people to do, if they do a good job, if they really have produced a quality part at a stamping machine or so forth, we raise them up. We print this in the company newspaper. We give awards and recognition to these kind of people, that they are not just, that's expected of you. You've done something better. And by doing that, you're sending a message to everybody else in the company that this is the behavior we would like to have in the future.
I think that's the key point. You have to make champions of the people that are doing the job right, and I think you also have to make role models of those people so that that type of behavior is followed by other employees. Set them up as champions and role models.
Gracias. Tenemos otra
Okay,
pregunta
we have
de
another
Tijuana.
question from
Esta vez
Tijuana.
viene de
This
Sancho.
time
Adelante.
comes from Sanjo.
Sí, la pregunta que tenemos aquí en Sanjo.
The question here is from Sanjo is, what is the way to implement TQM in a company which is multicultural?
I particularly like that question from our friends in Tijuana, because really this is one of the problems, actually opportunities we have in Southern California. We are probably the most culturally diverse area of the United States. We have our American citizens, our Vietnamese, they're from Mexico, we have English. We are passing through a tremendous phase of cultural change. We just recognize, we try as instructors to be very sensitive to the different cultural backgrounds of people and go ahead and implement regardless.
Otra pregunta dice,
Another
TQM
question.
nos obliga a un cambio de cultura. Estados Unidos tiene
Forces us to go and change our culture. Mexico has its culture, United States has its culture. Would the Mexicans have to change their culture, and what do you do when the management thinks that you have to change here with the resources and spend more money? They're two different questions.
They really are. I think, first of all, let's understand, when we talk about changing culture, we're not talking about changing your nationality or your national culture. We're talking about taking your work habits and work processes and trying to improve those so that they better serve the needs of the customer. I think the beauty of total quality, whether it's in Mexico or Japan or the United States or Argentina, is that it's going to take on a slightly different flavor because you have so many wonderful cultural dimensions in the different countries. And I think that's part of what makes TQM special and unique. So I don't think you have to give up your nationality or your cultural habits. We're not talking about that. We're talking about work-related processes.
And of course, the kind of culture we're talking about is that really employees are now stakeholders. They're considered to be part of the business. They should start thinking like businessmen, and we're going to give them the tools and so forth and be quite open with them of when we're making money and when we aren't making money. As stakeholders, they have to share in both sides.
How can the subcommittee or the sub-directors have a way in which you recognize and reward?
One of the things that we do in setting up the quality process is, of course, we talked about setting up the steering committee, and that's in your workbooks. But one of the issues that has to be dealt with at the steering committee level is we have to come up with an equitable, fair company policy on rewards and recognition. Each functional department head can't come up with one by himself. It really has to be thrashed out and discussed at the steering committee.
Can we amplify the concept of ISO 9000? Can you explain that?
Well, I'll defer to George on that because he's more involved in the ISO 9000.
Yeah, very briefly, in 1986, the countries of the world got together, allowing us held that there's going to be a significant increase in trade, and said that really across company borders, we have to have national standards for quality. Very specifically, they picked out about 21 areas in a company that have to be documented so we can communicate with each other. If we're shipping from Mexico to Europe, then we're guaranteed when that product lands in Europe and they're under ISO 9000 certification, it'll be the same as a United States product, And basically that's what's been going on. We're saying that really most companies, it really becomes a marketing strategy. If you're going to engage in world trade, eventually you're going to have ISO 9000 certification.
Another question asked, when there are more taxes and there's a lot more costs in order to be competitive, how would you suggest that TQM be successful when it comes to competitiveness?
Well, I think Philip Crosby, who wrote the book Quality is Free, proved that argument. In his book, Crosby says that while there is an initial investment to any quality process, that as a result of streamlining the different stages of creating a product or delivering a service, that there's a tremendous return on investment and, in fact, a cost savings. And that's why he came up with the title, Quality is Free, and I believe it. And I think those great companies like Motorola and others have proven over the years that they've been involved in the TQM process.
Thank you. One last telephone call. Go ahead. What would you recommend to a company, a telecommunication company, which have been going through this TQM for the last year and wants to go forward?
Management, visibility, and interest, and thrust, that they consider the TQM process extremely important, that it's constantly brought to the attention of all employees through employee meetings, that rewards and recognition is being done, that we never relax. We show patience, but we show persistence, that this is the direction the company must go, and we want to empower the people and get their contributions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf, Mr. Hinton. You were very kind to be with us. Thank you for being with us. The same goes to the people that was with us lately. The International Training Center will transmit the second video conference of the series Management in the 20th Century on the March 24th, 1994. Until next.